Us self-claiming some AGI milestone, that's just nonsensical benchmark hacking. The real benchmark is the world growing at 10% time. And in 91, I went to Moscone, basically that's when Microsoft first described a Win32 interface. And I said it was pretty clear to me what was going to happen, where the server was also going to be an x86 thing, right? So that when you have the scale advantages accruing to something, that's the secular bet you have to place, right? So that, and so what happened in the client was going to happen on the server side, and then you were able to then actually build client server applications, so the app model, and it became clear. Then the web was the big thing for us, which we had to deal with in fact, as soon as I joined Microsoft, I think, the browser, the Netscape browser or the Mosaic browser came out, November of 93, right? I think is when, Andreessen and crew sort of had that. And so that was a big game changer. I mean, in an interesting way, just as we were going on what was the client server wave, and it was clear that we were going to win it as well. We had the browser mode. I'd say app model, and we were able to embrace it with everything we did, right? Whether it was HTML in Word or build a new thing called the browser ourselves and compete for it, and then build a web server on our server stack and sort of go after it. Except, of course, we missed what turned out to be the biggest business model on the web, because we all assumed the web is all about going to be distributed. Who would have thought that search would be the biggest winner in organizing the web? Right. And so that's where we obviously didn't see it, and Google saw it and executed super well. So that's kind of one lesson learned for me, is like, hey, you got to really, that's where we obviously didn't see it, and Google saw it and executed super well. So that's kind of one lesson learned for me, is like, hey, you got to really not only get the tech trend right, you also have to get where is the value going to be created with that trend. And these business model shifts are probably tougher than even the tech trend changes.
Where is the value going to be created in AI?
That's a great one. So I think the at least in my current thing is, there are two places where that's a great one. So I think at least in my current thing is, there are two places where I can say with some confidence. One is the hyperscalers do well, right? Because the fundamental thing is, if you sort of go back to even how Sam and others describe it, I mean, like if, intelligence is log of compute, whoever can do lots of compute is a big winner.
Right.
And the other interesting thing is, if you look at underneath even any AI workload, like take ChatGPT, it's not like everybody's excited about what's happening on the GPU side. It's great, but it's like the ratio, like in fact, I think of my fleet even as a ratio of the AI accelerated storage to compute. And at scale, you got to grow it.
Yeah.
And so that infrastructure need for the world is just going to be exponentially growing, right? So in fact, it's manna from heaven to have these AI workloads, because guess what? They're more hungry for more compute, right? Not just for training, but we now know for test time. And as I said, test time, like here's an interesting thing. When you think of an AI agent, it turns out the AI agents is going to exponentially increase compute usage, because you now are not even bound by just one human invoking a program. It's one human invoking programs that invoke lots more programs. And so that's going to create massive, massive demand and scale for compute infrastructure. So I just don't see it, because this, by the way, is the other thing I've learned, is being very good at understanding what are winner-take-all markets and what are not winner-take-all markets is, in some sense, everything. Like I remember even in the early days when I was getting into Azure, I mean, Amazon had a very significant lead, and people would come to me and investors would come to me and say, oh, it's game over. You'll never make it. It's winner take all. And having competed against Oracle and IBM in client server, I knew that, look, the buyers will not tolerate winner take all, right? Structurally, hyperscale will never be a winner take all because buyers are smart. Consumer market sometimes can be winner take all, but anything there, the buyer is a corporation, an enterprise, an IT department, they will want multiple suppliers. And so you got to be one of the multiple suppliers. And so that, I think, is what will happen even in the model side. So there will be open source. There will be a governor, just like on Windows. One of the big lessons learned for me was if you have a closed source operating system, there will be a complement to it, which will be open source. And so to some degree, that's a real check on what happens. And so I think in models, there is one dimension of maybe there will be a few closed source. There will definitely be an open source alternative. And the open source alternative will actually make sure that the closed source winner take all is mitigated. So that's kind of at least my feeling. Going to be the same old stuff, which is in consumer. In some categories, there may be some winner take all network effect, right? After all, ChatGPT is a great example. Like, I mean, it's kind of like it's an at-scale consumer property that is already got real escape velocity, right? I go to the App Store and I see, it's always like there in the top 5, and I say, wow, like that's pretty unbelievable. So they were able to use that early advantage and parlay that into an app advantage. And so in consumer, that could happen. In the enterprise, again, I think there will be by category different winners. So that's sort of at least how I analyze it.
I have so many follow-up questions. We got to get to quantum in just a second. But so on the idea that maybe the models get commoditized, look, maybe somebody could have made a similar argument a couple of decades ago about the cloud, that fundamentally is just like a chip and a box. But in the end, of course, you and many others figured out you guys have amazing profit margins in the cloud, and you figured out ways to get economies of scale and add other value add. And fundamentally, even forgetting the jargon, like if you've got AGI and it's like helping you make better AIs, right now it's synthetic data and RL, maybe in the future it's not. Look, maybe somebody could have made a similar argument a couple of decades ago about the cloud, that fundamentally is just like a chip and a box. But in the end, of course, you and many others figured out you guys have amazing profit margins in the cloud, and you figured out ways to get economies of scale and add other value add. And fundamentally, even forgetting the jargon, like if you've got AGI and it's like helping you make better AIs, right now it's synthetic data and RL, maybe in the future it's an automated AI researcher. That seems like a good way to entrench your advantage there. I'm curious what you make of that, just the idea that like it really matters to be ahead there.
At scale, nothing is commodity, right? So to your point about cloud, I mean, everybody would say, oh, cloud's a commodity, except, when you scale. That's why the know-how of running a hyperscaler, right? Like you could say, oh, what the heck? I mean, I can just rack and stack servers, right? In fact, like in the early days of hyperscale, most people thought like, God, there are all these hosters. So, and those are not great businesses. Will there be anything like, is there a business even in hyperscale? And it turns out there is a real business, just because the know-how of running, whatever, in the case of Azure, the world's sometimes they are very, big training jobs that need to have highly concentrated peak flops that are provisioned to it, that also need to cohere or what have you. That's great. So we should have enough data center footprint to be able to give that. But at the end of the day, these are all anyway becoming so big, even in terms of, if you say take pre-training scale, and if it needs to keep going, even pre-training scale at some point has to cross data center boundaries. It's all more or less there. So great. Once you start crossing pre-training data center boundaries, is it that different than anything else? Right. So therefore, the way I think about it is, hey, distributed computing will remain distributed. So go build out your fleet such that it's ready for large training jobs. It's ready for test time compute. It's ready. In fact, if this RL thing, the thing that might happen is you build one large model, and then after that, there's tons of like this RL going on and test. To me, it's kind of like, again, more training flops, because you want to create these highly specialized distilled models for different tasks. So you want that fleet. And then the serving needs, right? At the end of the day, speed of light is speed of light. So you can't sort of have one data center in Texas and say, I'm going to serve the world from there. You got to serve the world based on having an inference fleet everywhere in the world.
Right.
So that's kind of how I think of our, build out a true hyperscale fleet. Oh, and by the way, I want my storage and compute also close to all of these things, because it's not just AI accelerators that are stateless. The big winners here are not going to be tech companies. The winners are going to be the broader industry that uses this commodity that, by the way, is abundant.
Right.
And suddenly productivity goes up and the economy is going, growing at a faster rate. When that happens, we'll be fine as an industry. But that's to me the moment, right? So us self-claiming some AGI milestone, that's just nonsensical benchmark hacking to me. The real benchmark is the world growing
Right.
at 10%.
Okay, so if the world grew at 10%, the world economy is 100 trillion or something. If the world grew at 10%, that's like extra 10 trillion
That's it.
in value produced every single year. If that is the case, that's true. So if you really think like there's some potential here to 10x or 5x the growth rate of the world, and then you're like, well, what is the revenue from GPT-4? I mean, like if you really think that that's the possibility from the next level up, shouldn't you just like let's go crazy, let's do the hundreds of billions of dollars of compute? I mean, there's like some chance you get that,
right? I mean, like the thing is, like, I mean, like here's the interesting thing, right? The real question, quite frankly, to answer is this just about like that's why even that balanced approach to the fleet at least is very, very important to me, right? Which is it's not about building compute. It's about building compute that can actually help me not only train the next big model, but also serve the next big model. And you understand until you do those two things, you're not going to be able to really be in a position to take advantage of even your investment, right? So that's kind of where it's not a race to just building a model. It's a race to creating a commodity that is getting used in the world to drive. So you have to have a complete thought